Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. So today I'll be walking through just a survey of all of the different AI coding tools that are out there. So they've taken the programming world by storm. Everyone's using these various different tools in order to speed up their workflows. And so I'll be walking through kind of the different form factors that they take, and then also just what I do, what I use, and my experience with it. So one little quirk with today's talk, I generated almost all of the slides with Gemini Nano Banana. So if anyone's familiar with that model, it's this model that you can prompt it and then it will make diagrams or slides or images or anything. And so like extra AI tool twist on this. So this slide, the one that we used to promo the event, this was AI generated. I just gave it, like, I copy pasted the description of the event and then it said, okay, here's the image. So some of the things will look wonky and have misspelled words and stuff like that, but I just wanted to show off like this is what's possible with one of the tools that's out there. Um, so I'll start off with, there's these AI coding tools and they have varying different levels of autonomy. So in like the self-driving car space, there's level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and it's saying like how much can these like cars drive on their own versus how much do you have to assist. And we're kind of going through the same thing with AI coding assistants right now. So the very basic, you start with actual manual coding. So you have a blank file, and then you say, I'm going to type in all this code in order to make the computer do what I want. So you have regular editors, you have text editors, you have VS Code, you have all of these different forms where you can basically say, help me write this code. And it might do little stuff like making sure you're not misnaming variables and stuff like that. But in general, it's just a text editor, and it's up to you to actually write all of the details in. And then at one point, we got the added bonus of there was a GitHub Copilot. And what it was doing was basically reading the code as you were writing it. And then it would give you a little autocomplete. So you start writing one line and then it says, oh, I know you're trying to type out this variable. So it would complete it for you. Or you're trying to write out this little function. So it might do 1 or 2 lines for you. And then we've gotten further and further. So one of the workflows that people started doing was basically saying, like, I'm running this code, I ran into an error, copy paste that into ChatGPT. It tells me, oh, it's wrong because of this. And then you go back and you copy paste your code and you say, okay, now make this alteration. And so that actually is what a lot of people are doing right now. And it works perfectly well. But then we reach an even higher level where it's like directly integrated into your coding environment. So instead of needing to copy and paste it to a uh, new web browser or something like that, it's just directly part of your development environment. So it can directly read your files and say, okay, here's the current state, do some modification, try to run the code, um, do all of those steps. And it's got much better context because it actually sees like your whole environment, what you have installed, all of that stuff. So it can help you a whole lot just by having the right context. So with the ChatGPT flow, it has whatever you give to it, and with these more integrated tools, it automatically has most of what you would probably want. Um, so with these agentic IDEs, what you can do is you can ask it questions and then it will go look through your code and maybe answer a question for you, or you can ask it, go modify this file, and it would go actually make the changes for you. It can even try to run the code and verify that it's working correctly. So there's one different flavor that has become kind of popular recently, which is spec driven. So basically you tell it, I want this, I want this, I want this. It needs to meet this criteria, and then it will go and it builds out all of the different steps. So it's kind of more autonomous because instead of needing to kind of interact at every in between step, saying, okay, build this button, now build that button, you basically say, here's the document of like everything that I want you to do. And then it will go step by step and try and build out the whole thing for you. And then there's even higher level than that, which is like all of the vibe coding tools. There's certain tools where it's like, this is designed for people who don't know any coding at all. So it abstracts the whole thing away. You just basically say, I want a website, I want an app, I want it to do this, I want it to display this data, I want it to do whatever. And it just does the entire thing for you. You don't even have any visibility on the code. It just basically says, build a website, it builds a website, it deploys it, it does the whole thing. So there's this whole spectrum of autonomy. Um, So one thing with this talk, so these slides, I made them with Gemini Nano Banana, and I also posted the links for the chats that I had with them. So I had a little conversation, and then I said, make this slide now, and then that's how these were made. So if you're curious of like how these slides were made, you can go follow these links, and it will actually just show you the conversation that I had in order to generate these. Um, So here's another variation showing what some of the workflows look like. So there's the sort of copy paste basic assistant mode. There's the smart autocomplete. So like GitHub Copilot, you hit tab and then it fills in the next line. One way of using it is for explanation. So you can put it in sort of like read only mode where you're saying, I have this code, I don't quite understand it. Go parse through it and then just describe to me what's happening. And that's a very useful way of doing it. And then another one is human in the loop. So you're doing this process where you're saying, okay, make this modification, and it directly shows you like this highlighted portion is what I changed. Is this correct? Is this not correct? And then you can kind of agree, disagree on all of the different things that you're trying to do. So one of the other flavors of this is code review or like quality assurance work. So say you have a bunch of PRs or something, or you've written some code and then you want to verify, is this actually correct? You can go have these coding assistants read through your code and say like, what will happen here? Is this going to break when I have null values? Is this going to have some other error because I didn't plan for some certain scenario of the state of my machine? So it can be useful for all different pieces of the pipeline. So now I'm going to jump over to Cursor and just kind of show some of how this can work. So I have to pray to the demo gods that all of this goes smoothly. So I'll just walk you through this scenario. So what I'm going to do is I deleted my Python file there. I had some code there, but I'll just start from scratch. So at work, I've been working on this problem where I'm trying to add multilingual support to a model. And so now it needs to predict all of these different characters for Chinese and Japanese and Korean and Arabic and all these other characters. So one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is like, do I have the full vocabulary of these different languages? For English, it's very easy. We have our 26 letters and then we just say this is our vocabulary and that's easy. But for Chinese and Japanese, they have many more characters, so it can be more difficult. So this is Cursor. Anyone familiar with VS Code? It's very similar. It's just a fork off of VS Code. So this is your coding environment. And what I'm showing here is I have a few different files. So these are just text files, and they just have lists of all of the characters from different vocabulary sets. So this is the vocabulary set of my new model that I've been working on. This is the characters that we found in a data set that we were benchmarking against. This is a character set that is from Paddle OCR, which is like a related model. So what I want to do is I want to see, do I have good coverage of this data set based on the characters that are in this file. So what I can do is I'll start a new file. One-handed. And so the typical way of doing this, if you had no automation, you would basically say, okay, I need to figure out how to read in this text file and gather up all of the characters inside of it. And then I want to gather up all of the characters inside of this file and then say, how do these overlap? Do I have extra characters? Do I have not enough characters? Do I cover the full vocabulary of these? So if I was doing this manually, I would go write my code, say, open this file, open that file, and then find some way to compare them. But the first level, I would say, of automation is you can do something where I'm going to put the mic down for so like You have uh, sure, sure. I'll keep going, but we'll. Um, so I'll start this script and it's blank file, but what I can do is basically describe what I want, and then the autocomplete will start filling it out for me. So I put just the comment mark, and it's already like predicting what I'm trying to do. It looks at the name of the file, and then it says script to analyze character sets in a text file. It's like, okay, that's good. Um, and then let's start off by saying like load in let's load in this file. So I can just do something like that. So now I have a comment there. And then what it's going to do is it's just going to kind of write some of this code for me. So I just hit tab and it just said, okay, next few lines, next few lines. So it just wrote all of this for me. So now I can try running this. Uh, so what it did is it loaded the file and it printed it all off. And then it said, how many characters are there? So this is the listing of all the different characters. This is the number of them. And then it tried to convert it to a table, but that wasn't the right kind. So it made an error. Um, so what I can do is then I can say, okay, I want to um, that's yeah. Okay. Hopefully that works. Um, So now we want to load this other file. So we have two different files. One of them is the vocabulary of my model. One of them is the vocabulary of my data set. And I want to check, am I missing any characters that are in my data set? Because if it's not in my vocabulary, then my model is not going to be able to predict all of the different Chinese characters. Um, so I can just go through and it tries to do the same thing, and it's going to error out on the same part, saying that it's a table and it's not correct. So this is one level of automation, is basically saying it's going to predict the next line, and then you hit tab and it's going to write the next few lines for you. But what is running here is some kind of not like peak intelligence model. It's something that can run constantly very quickly. So it just wants to be able to output code quickly. As you're typing, it wants to be able to react in like a millisecond, let's say. Here's the next line. Uh, so a different mode that this can do, this is integrated with a chat window on the side. And what you can do here is there's various different modes here. So there's ask, which is basically like read only. You're going to ask it a question and then it can answer something for you with the context that you've given it. So I could be like, how could I load these files and compare their. And what it's doing is it's looking at the file that I have open, and then you can see it's reading all of these different pieces. So it's saying, okay, I read this file, I read that file. What do I need to do in order to actually handle this? And it even points out, oh, look, this table thing isn't correct. So that's not a valid string method. And it says, okay, make these changes, make that changes. And then it warns me, you're in ask mode right now. I would make these changes for you, but I can't write. I'm basically a freedom. So it's got various different modes. I don't use these ones all that often. I just mostly use agent mode, but I'm just showing like if you're just trying to understand some code, ask mode is a very good way of using that. So I'll switch to agent mode, and then I can say, please make these changes. And so we can read through what it proposed. And it proposed basically, okay, I see you have this file. It has characters in a single line string, characters in a single line string. And then it actually noticed that this PPOCR one, if we look at this, each character is on a new line. So its file is a slightly different format, and it picked up on that automatically. I didn't have to explain, here's these two different data formats. It just automatically looked at them and observed and said, okay, I need to handle these slightly differently. And then it proposed basically this idea of like, okay, we want to see this one has letters that this one doesn't, and vice versa. And then we also want to see how many of them are in both of them. So I agree with that plan. And then I can say, please make these changes. Now I'm in agent mode, and agent mode will allow this to actually write some code and do these modifications. So it's spitting out all this code. It's modifying this file here. And so now it said, make all of these changes, do a diff, and said, okay, I'm going to update the title. I'm going to update how we're loading these files. I'm going to load all of them in separately, and then print off some aspects of them. And then I'm going to measure the overlap and all of these different things with them. So what I can do now, so within this, it can actually run it. So I can see that it automatically ran and said, I want to try this analyze char set. And it realized it tried to use Python, but it needed to use Python 3 in order to get it to run correctly. And so it actually runs the code, observes what it spat out, and then it says, okay, how many different characters are in each of these different files? And then it says there's 38 characters that are in this data set that aren't in my vocabulary. So potentially there's some things missing. So now if I want to add like one layer more, I could be like, so I prompt it and I say basically like, show me which characters are missing. I want to make sure I have full coverage of this data set. And then at the same time, I want it to tell me like which languages am I missing characters from. And so what it does is it goes and it finds the package that it needs to, and it says, okay, load these characters, figure out which ones are missing. And then also it's going to print off and say, oh, it looks like we're missing mostly from Chinese, or these are like special subscript values, or these are something else. So we can see it ran this and it found we're missing these superscripts. So in my character set that I made, I didn't do the subscript 0. So if you're putting something to the 0th power, I don't have that as part of the thing. There's certain like currency symbols, there's a trademark symbol, there's checkboxes. And so you can just see the level of automation here. Like I just kind of in English told it like, I want this, I want that. And I put a little bit of the programmer language on it because I know what I'm trying to do. But in general, like I didn't write any of this code. It just was able to figure out how do I need to handle all of these different things? How do I compare these different character sets together? How do I find the properties saying which language they came from and what different subset of characters they came from? So this is just showing like the speed and power of these things. If I wanted to go do this by myself, like I'm sure I can open a text file and figure out how to split it into characters and everything, and then figure out like all of that stuff I can't do, but it's going to take me extra time to go look up like what's the Unicode data property in order to get these things. So this is just a quick run through of Cursor. So this is the one that I use, and I use it pretty extensively, and I'll talk a little bit more later about the various different ways that I can use this. Any questions on Cursor agentic coding at this point? This is online. So this is actually sending some of the context to, in this case, Claude. So one of the things with this is you can pick different models. So these different models is sending some of the text to different providers. So it can send it to OpenAI or Claude. You can run models locally, but I tend not to. So you can send it to Google or whoever you choose.
Hi, my name is Nico. So you mentioned Cursor, the IDE. Have you used Cursor CLI at all? Because I know it has the ability to switch between models just like the IDE does. And how do you find that that compares to Cloud Code, specifically with Opus 4.5?
I haven't. Yeah, this is my preferred form factor. So I've looked at some of the other tools, but I don't really see the appeal of Claude Code and some of the others because I prefer this view where I directly get to see the code and all of the changes that it's making. I'll talk about some of those other tools in a second. Um, so that's just a glimpse of like what agentic coding looks like. So that form that I just showed, there's similar ways to do that in VS Code has its own agents now. There's Windsurf, Google Cloud, Antigravity. There's all of these different tools that do similar things to that. Uh, so I'll just kind of talk through what that loop looks like. So what I did is I type something in, I send a query to the model, and then the model has to figure out like what context it's in, what files it has access to, all of that stuff. So I basically said, look, I have these three files. I want you to read them and compare them and everything. And so what it's doing is it can read the code that's already in the directory. It can read some of the files. It can do all of these different tool calls in order to like get more information back. So on the right-hand side, I have this tool set, and these are just some of the examples of what the model can call in order to trigger different behaviors. So it can do all of the different stuff that you would normally do inside of the terminal. So if you want to list the files that are in the folder, if you want to count the words, or if you want to move a file or something, it has full terminal access. So it can do all kinds of different operations inside of the terminal. So anything you could do in the terminal, it can do in the terminal for you. A lot of the different tools have specific file editing tools that are focused for writing code. So one thing that people have realized is that it's not as good to basically like what people were doing at the beginning was give it the entire file, and then if you want to make a change, it outputs the whole file again. And so what people were realizing was it's not that good. If I give it 1,000 lines of code, it needs to spit out another 1,000 lines of code and get every single line exactly correct. What people have realized is that they can set it up in such a way where it just does sort of small dips. So it just says basically change lines 300 to 350, and then it just makes one small edit. So it doesn't have to basically parrot back the entire file. So that's one of the major like innovations was it's much more reliable when we do things in these small little edits along the way rather than I'm going to spit out the entire file. One important piece that I'll talk about with this is the retrieval and search element of it. So you're going to ask the model to do different things, and it needs to be able to go find the correct files and find where the context is. If you say, oh, modify this function, it has to go find what file that's actually in, where that function might be touching. There's all kinds of different things that it needs to search for all the time. It can also call linters and other tools to make sure that it made valid code. So it made some modification and then it has some indent error or added an extra quote or something like that, and it breaks your whole file. So it has tools where it can directly say like, did I mess this up? Is this broken? Do I need to fix anything? It calls a linter and then it says, oh, your file's broken. Here, and then it goes. So for the like top the top models now, it's very rare that you end up like the agent finished and you got something that won't run. Like it almost always runs, even if it's not the correct like operation it wants. You might do the wrong thing, but it's not going to do something that doesn't. So this whole loop, what it does, it might read some code, and then typically the way that things work now is it will make a plan. So it outputs a few different steps that it thinks it needs to go to, and then after it will go execute that plan. So people figured out that that's a very useful way to do things because it keeps it on track better. One of the difficult things is like the model will get in a pigeonhole where it's saying, I need to read this file, I need to do this thing, and it spends a bunch of context, and then it finally does a thing, and it forgets, oh, that wasn't my entire goal, that was just a piece of the thing that I was trying to work on. So this planning and then editing pattern made it much more reliable to actually be able to do long-term tasks, because it says like basically, here's my checklist of things I need to do, remember that, and don't forget while I'm doing all of these other things in the tool. So it has access to be able to run terminal commands, but then it can also read the results back. So you ran code, and then it can also see like, okay, I made the Python print off the characters, like in the example I was showing, and then it can read them and understand, okay, some of these are Chinese, some of these are subscripts. It can actually look and analyze those. And then it runs all the tools to make sure what it did was valid and can actually run. And then if it didn't, it can just continue the loop and keep working on whatever it's doing, or if it's finished it, it does exactly what I want, and then return it back to you and say, okay, this file is ready to run. So this is kind of the agentic coding loop pattern. Yeah.
So at the risk of stating the obvious, when we say this is an agentic pattern, this is now no longer just one LLM long inference. There are subtasks, and the subtasks can have different context than the original main loop, right?
Yeah. So one thing to think about this is like in your typical LLM interaction before this, the reason that we call this a loop is you would go to the LLM, you ask it a question, it returns something back to you, and then that's it. If you want to continue to more steps, you have to type something else in and say, okay, now do this, now do that. So with the agentic coding loop, it can basically say, I'm having a conversation with the user, but then I received this query. Now I'm going to have a whole bunch of conversations with the environment in some way, with the computer. And so you're not needing to like press through every single step. It's saying, I'm having a conversation with the environment of the computer, and then it gets to the end, and then it finally says, okay, user, this is all of the steps I went through, this is what I completed. So the loop part is like it interacting with the environment. So I mentioned this plan and act paradigm, and this is a lot of the tools kind of independently found these, but there's some papers that point to basically this is very, very useful, because often someone gives you like this overarching like you need to complete this website, but in order to make the website, you need to make the homepage, you need to make the referral page, you need to make the profile page, you need to make all these different things. And so what would happen is the model only has a certain amount of context length, and it would eat through all of that and then get to the end and forget what it had been doing. And so this plan and act step ended up being very important for getting it to actually do things reliably over these long trajectories. So this is just one table showing what this looks like, where the plan and act actually has a very big impact on how the model actually uses for some of these long tasks.
Right. Sorry to interrupt, but there's some comments of the wireless.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got my hands back. So it was mentioned like there's different form factors of this. So the form factor that I prefer is the like actual AI IDE. So Cursor, VS Code. I can have that little window that's doing the chats on the side, but then I also can see the code directly and I can review it and say, is this doing what I want or not? Is this getting like overly complex? But there's also this whole family of like terminal tools and background agents. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those when we get to them, but just understand that there's like different form factors to this, where it's like these terminal tools, you're basically just giving it a terminal and you're just saying, okay, do whatever you can within this terminal. You don't have a special like VS Code or cursor or anything. It's just whatever you can complete in the terminal, just go do all of those operations, which is actually like a lot. It's like basically unlimited, but it's not as visual. You can't see the code as easily. You can't see all the edits it's making. It's not as interactive, really.
Is there an example of that? What's an example of that one?
So there's like Claude Code and Codex, and there's many different tools that can do that. So you install it just as like a system level thing, and then it can go interact and use those tools. I have some examples on later slides, so I'll talk about those.
Okay, but okay, Claude Code, my Claude Code at least is in the IDE, right? It knows what I've highlighted, yeah, etc. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's also the family of automatic code review. So there's stuff like CodeRabbit and some of the other ones where basically you have all your stuff on GitHub and then you make PRs and you make all these changes. And then what you're doing is you say, okay, I made these changes, go have Claude, go have GPT-5, go have whatever, go review this and just say, is this going to break things or is this a reasonable change? Is it like not the correct style? You can have it do all kinds of things on top of it. So I'll pause and just talk a little bit about like some of the impact this is having on the industry. So one thing to think about is like, how much does it cost to write a line of code? If you're just as a human, you want to write a line of code, there's a certain amount of time that it takes to just figure out like, what do I want to write for this specific line? But there's a very high cost to like, I just want to understand what this code is doing and where I actually need to make this change. So the cost of writing a line is very variable depending on the size of the code base that you're working with and how difficult it is to work with. So like if you want to make some change in some big library and actually you have to read through multiple different layers of code in order to just understand like what's the impact of this one line change going to be, the cost can be very high. So writing one line of code can be very difficult. So the LLMs and the AI coding assistants potentially bring that much lower. So it helps you on the front of reading and understanding code and what the interactions between all the files are going to be. But then at the same time, it makes the cost of generating lines of code like virtually nothing. Like it can write all of those lines of code that we just saw in 10 seconds. Whereas for you, it might have taken longer just to remember all the libraries, all the ways to interact with all the different things. So there's a very big impact on what it costs to actually generate a line of code with these AI coding assistants. The flip side is this also incurs some costs. So people are interacting with these either on a per token basis or a subscription, or they're paying for some certain tool on top of things. So in general, people have found these to be very worth it though. Like there are people that are spending $5,000 a month on tokens. So you just say, I'm doing so much work and this AI coding assistant is helping me so much that it's worth it to actually use the smartest model as much as I possibly can. So in general, people have found really good value out of just like scaling this up and using it very heavily. So the one like sticking point that a lot of people have had is like they think, oh, this is just AI slop. Like it's just outputting all of this code, but it's garbage. It's not very high quality. And so the difficulty is like when the cost of writing code becomes virtually zero, you can output code very fast, but it's hard to actually verify and make sure that this is good code and completes what you want and is safe and is like an efficient way to do things. One of the things that I've run into a lot is that it will write things very defensively. And so you ask it to load this text file, and then it will protect in 8 different ways of what if it has a bad character, what if the file's corrupt, what if all of these different things that it's like it for our use case we were just looking at, it could make something that was 8 lines and make it 100 lines because it's trying to prevent all of these other issues that you can have. So that's one of the things that I've run into is like it's amazing that it can just generate so many lines of code, but then you have to make sure like, is this like a small maintainable snippet that I can use, or is this like hyper focused on the single thing that I'm trying to do? In general, I think people are better at kind of architecting the code in some reusable way, whereas when you do like the different coding assistants, they say, this is my one problem, I solve exactly this one problem. And then if you want to like have like the more generalizable pieces that you reuse, it's difficult because the model will choose to just, if I can output 30 lines of code for a new function to load a new thing and it's free, just do that. But then eventually you say, now I have 10 different 30-line functions instead of one 100-line function or something like that. So I was listening to a podcast, and one of the things that they were talking about was basically, it's not that the AI like forces you to bad quality or forces you to slop. It's just an amplifier of whatever you were already doing. So if you were already a like very very picky person and you made sure that your code quality was good, you can guide the agent to do that. You can prompt it and say, no, I don't like that function, rewrite it to be shorter or handle these different scenarios. It can just be a pure speed win and you can keep your quality. But the problem is a lot of people fall into the like, if you were already someone who wrote messy code and just did things fast and didn't do it in the best way, it just speeds you up down that cycle too. So you say, I'm a messy coder, I do things in sporadic ways, and then the AI helps you just do that faster. So you just build your own pile of code even faster than you would have. So they were basically saying like, it just amplifies. It's not necessarily like forces you good, forces you bad. It can be used in both ways. So one of the pieces that I mentioned was the retrieval element of this. So there's different flavors of retrieval. So the model hopefully is able to go find exactly what you're talking about very quickly. So there's this sort of the lexical search. So there's your like command line tools like grep and ripgrep. And what these do is they're just command line tools, and you can just give it to the model and the model says, I'm going to do some search to try to find this function name anywhere in this directory or something like that. So with this, it's just direct like text matching, trying to find the name of a file, name of a function. And so the model is able to drive this and just basically say, I'm going to search for something just like regular text search. Another form that people are taking is semantic search. So they take your code and then they embed it in some way. And then when you make a query, your model is able to make some certain searches based on that. And so if you say like, I want to find the function that does whatever, it goes and it looks for the embedding that matches that kind of shape, basically. And so people are using different combinations of these when they're building these agents. And then a very popular one that has come up recently is this agentic search. So this ripgrep search is very fast. It's just your regular terminal command. This semantic search is also very fast. You index your code base once, and then when you make a query, it's able to find these things very quickly. The agentic search is potentially very slow because what it's doing is it's basically opening all of these files in sequence and just giving it to your LLM and saying, is this what you're talking about? Is this what you're talking about? Does this have the function that we're looking for? So this agentic search is extremely powerful and smart, but it's potentially very slow. So that's one of the downsides of that. If you want the absolute best in terms of accuracy, agentic search is typically the way that you want to go, but it might cost many seconds of latency. So you might not get a response back very quickly. So I'll just cut away to this SWE grep for a second. So there's this company, Cognition. they make a tool called Devin. And one of the things that they worked on, this is sort of a fusion between grep and that agentic search. So what they figured out is agentic search is the most accurate way to do things, but it's very slow. But they wanted to figure out, how do we make this fast? So basically what they did is they trained a specialized small model that's very good at just kind of querying the code very quickly and understanding, like, is this relevant? Is this irrelevant? And they amped it up by making it in parallel. So it's such a small model that they can run 16 in parallel and then say, look at all of these files all at once, and just say, scan through the whole directory 16 at a time. And then they made it significantly faster. So they have certain GIFs in here, videos, just basically showing, like, here's if you had Sonnet 4.5 trying to do things sequentially. Sonnet's extremely smart model, but it's a little bit slow and is only doing one thing at a time. This SWE-grep, what it's doing is it's saying, we have a small specialized model that's just focused on finding code very fast, and then it just does it in parallel, and then it does it so much faster than the other one is able to do. So this is something that is like a very nice to have when you're using these coding agents. If it's the difference between one of your steps taking 9 seconds and 27 seconds, that's very worth it if it's able to keep that performance. So one other element of this is when you're typically talking with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whoever, they have a certain context length. And it's not that often for you to run into that context length when you're just talking to it. You're just asking it, what's the capital of wherever? Where's a good place to get dinner? The reality is you're probably not going to use 128K tokens in order to have that conversation. But in coding, it's very hungry in terms of context, because it's pulling in all your different files, is potentially running code and seeing the terminal spit out 1,000 lines. It's very hungry in terms of context. So one of the tricks that people figured out to do is all of these different things for context management. So you're running this code and then it's getting information back, and eventually it hits its window. So it says 128K, 256K, 1 million tokens, however much. And what it will do is it will say, okay, I have this whole set of inputs. Now summarize this. Just try to crush this down to just the essence, because a lot of it was probably not useful information for future iterations. And so what it will do is say, like, I have 100K tokens, condense this down to 8K tokens, and then that's your context now. So it's very lossy, because you had a whole history of all of the things that you did, and then it's trying to compress that down. But it's very useful, because then you can continue working. If you hit the context length limit and then you're just done, that can be very frustrating, because you had something, it's doing good edits, and then it hits the context limit, and then you just say, okay, now I have to start over, and I need to give it all of that context again of what I'm trying to work on. So this compacting, this compression is a very useful step. So if you're using any of these tools, you'll see, like, I'm working. In Cursor, it has this little like dial showing how much of the context limit you've used up. And then once it gets like close to full, it will do some compaction step. And it can be a little bit frustrating, because it hits that like summarization compacting point, and then you're like, now it's stupid again, because it lost some of my context that I needed. But it's very useful, because it lets you continue working, basically. What some people have done is they've done this as sort of like an external memory RAG thing. So basically, as it's going to write things to a text file or some other format. And then when it needs to, it can say, oh, I need to remember, like, what was my plan? So it can go write its plan and then go retrieve from that when it needs to. Or it can say, like, okay, I don't need to write all of this stuff. I just ran some command and it just spit out 1,000 lines. I don't need all of this. I only need the 5 that were an error, for example. And so it can just choose what it wants to store, actually. So one of the recent things is this recursive language model. And this is kind of the idea of slicing things up and not just always putting everything into the context length over time. It's splitting it into smaller pieces and then choosing what goes in and what stays out, basically. So that's one of the more recent things. It's not in like all the products yet, but it's a useful trick. So one of the things with this context length is we hit this more heavily in code than we do in most other things. But people have done this testing. They call it needle in a haystack. And the idea is basically we're going to plant some fact in the middle of this other text and then see if you can actually retrieve it back. And what people have figured out is like, you hope that this whole 256K context is useful. But what they found is we put this little fact somewhere in the context and then we ask it all the way at the end, can you retrieve that fact again? And if you look at this graph, what it's showing is basically not all the time, which is kind of frustrating because you say it's said in pure plain English. It's not like some reasoning that it has to do. It's just like some fact about San Francisco, and can you recall that back? And they found like with many of these models, they couldn't do this perfectly. And they found as you extend the context, it gets worse and worse over time. The newer models, all of the most recent ones, have gotten better and better at needle in the haystack. So they've probably been trained to actually do those tasks. So people have moved to different forms of benchmarking and understanding like what's the actual capability at all of these different context lengths. But this context length management is very important because you do get to the point where it's like, okay, the model claims it can do 256K, but it gets like half IQ at 128K. And so you want to figure out ways in order to manage that context well. Yeah.
All right, if you could just flip back to the last slide. What is the explanation for the like vertical red line that occurs like between 24,000 tokens and 40,000 tokens? Because it seems to improve after that for a little while before it hits the polygon here.
I don't have a like guaranteed explanation, but my bet is that what a lot of the groups do during training is they have different phases of training. So what they'll do is they'll start training at 8K context length, and then they'll have another phase at 16, then 32, because it gets more and more expensive as you extend this context length. So my bet is that their base training was at some context length, and then they had a different phase that was like context extension, and it must have had some cutoff around 32K or something like that. That's my educated guess, but it could just be random pattern. Hard to say. So I won't go into too much detail about these, but I'm just putting out the word context rot. So people have realized that there's this phenomenon of the model gets dumber as you go longer and longer, basically. So they realize like we can just make the model lose its intelligence by just repeating the same word over and over again and then asking the question later. So its attention gets all gummed up by and other stuff that's happening to it. So you can get something where it's like 100% of the time, it's question. Like, this is not that many tokens, and now it's 50% accuracy, which is pretty surprising. So there's also this paper, and it talks about the effective context window versus the actual context window, and it's kind of the same idea. Like, you can claim my model can do 256K, but then if at 128K it gets much worse, then it's not really that useful past that limit. And that's kind of, I believe that's an artifact of like, there's the phased training that people typically do. They do some sort of context extension during their training process. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is like, there's a lot of focus on the models. So they say, I'm using Claude 4.5, or I'm using GPT-5, or I'm using Gemini 3. there's a lot of focus. Like this model's intelligence drives a lot of the results of this, but there's also very significant impact of the harness that you build around this. So there's this harness bench, and basically what they were trying to do was say like, part of the skill is from the model, but part of the skill is also how you structure the things around that. So if you look at like VS Code versus Cursor, there's a lot of people that are like, oh, Cursor is the best, you need to use that over VS Code. They're using the same model in the back end, except for Cursor has figured out exactly the right way to prompt things, exactly the right way to manage the context, exactly the right way to interact with all the different terminal tools. So what they've seen is like the model matters a lot, but the harness also matters a ton. You can totally make or break like if something's a positive experience or not based on just the harness that's built around it. So at one of my old companies, when I was working for H2O, we had there's this Gaia benchmark, and this is a test of like general agentic tasks. So it'd be like, can you go find this website and then answer a question based on it and stuff like that. And everyone had access to the same models. So it was purely a race of who can build the best tools, who can build the best harness. So you can see if like you look in this model family thing, it's not like someone has some amazing agentic model. Everyone has access to the same models. It's just how do you prompt it? How do you give it the right tools? How do you coax it to do the things that you want it to reliably? That's the biggest thing. So Claude Code, mentioned earlier, there's all these different flavors. So now I'll just kind of cycle through some of the different tools and talk about what they do. So Claude Code, this is the directions to install it and run it and some examples. And this is, I would say, like right now, the leaders is probably Cursor and Claude Code. Like this is big split between these two. People just prefer different form factors and different ways of interacting with things. So this is a terminal tool that most people, what they do is they have like a $200 subscription and then just interact with Claude a whole bunch, and it runs through their terminal and can do a whole bunch of things smartly. And people like this because that whole harness thing, like Anthropic made this model and then they built this harness around it, and they basically say this is probably the best harness that you can make for this model because it was natively built by the people that designed the model and trained the model and informed it for these things. So they have some examples of common workflows and how you might use this. So there's a bunch of detail here. One of the interesting things that I wanted to point out, so there's this guy, Boris, who is one of the creators of Claude Code, and on Twitter, who's basically saying like, here's how I run Claude Code. This is the way that I use it. And it's an interesting read. I don't understand how someone can possibly run it like this. So I feel like I'm a very heavy user of Cursor when I'm in my regular day-to-day work. I use it a whole lot. But the way that he talks about using it, he's talking about basically like I start up my day and I spin up 5 Claudes, and then they're all doing separate parallel work for me, and then checking in on them periodically and moving them all steps forward. Maybe it's because I do different kinds of work than he does, but it's very impressive to see like the way that he puts these things together and is able to like orchestrate it. He becomes the manager. He's not like the actual coder or like in the weeds of things anymore. So this is an interesting thread. If anyone wants to see some tips of like how the creator actually uses the tool, this is an interesting thread to read through. So there's also this tool, Devin. So this is one of the original ones. So they were one of the first tools to put out a $200 subscription and say like, look, we can replace your software engineers. This thing is so good. Like we don't need software engineers anymore. And generally they've done a very good job of building this out and making it so it does a lot of things automated, and they have integrations with a whole bunch of things. So if you look at this, you can like point it to Jira tickets and stuff like that, and it will be like fix this bug, and then it goes in the background and it will make a PR for you and stuff like that. So Devin's one of the other popular ones. This is from the same company that I was showing the Swig rep from. So that's the very fast retrieval model. There's Codex. This is from OpenAI, ChatGPT. So this is more similar to Claude Code again. So there's all these different ways to interact with it. So like you can see they have IDE extension. So you can basically say, go use it in VS Code or Cursor, I believe. Or you can use it just purely like a terminal tool. What I've seen a lot of people use it is like in the cloud. So basically they have some environment that's in the cloud and you say, here's my repository, go make these changes, run the code, verify it works. There's all these kinds of things that are built around it. I'm not as familiar with all of these different tools. I've mostly been using Cursor, but I'm aware of and I hear all of these people talking about these. So I would say like the typical workflow I've heard is some people are using Cursor, some people are using Claude Code, some people are using Codex. I don't know anyone who's using Devin right now. I'm sure they exist, but not on the teams that I've worked on. So I'll go over some of the like other flavors as well. So there's this, I'm going to put these in the same bucket. So there's AMP and Cline. And there are two different flavors of similar to Cursor, but these are like just add-ons that you can add to VS Code or Cursor or whatever. I haven't interacted with these that much. I did listen to a podcast with the Cline people, and one of the things that they talked about a bit was like, we have this interesting effort dial. How much effort is the agent doing versus how much effort are you doing? And so Cline allows you to like really amp up the effort of the agent. I'd rather spend $10 and know that whatever I'm reviewing after is like very heavily vetted and good code and like the best that you can possibly get out of a model. And so Cline is an interesting one because they basically said like all of these other tools, they're backed by some subscription. And this is saying you're paying for the tokens. And if you want the best result, just dial up the tokens. And if you don't care about the cost and you want the best result possible, then we'll allow you to do that. If you are cost conscious, then we can dial it back. But most of these other tools, they're subscription based. So you pay your $50 a month, $200 a month, and then they're trying to make sure you don't like spend in an extreme way. So Cline, they don't charge based on the subscription, so they don't care how much you use. If you spend $5,000 worth of credits, great. It doesn't matter to them. So one of the libraries tools that I'll mention is this Ralph tool that's gotten popular in the past couple weeks or so. It's basically people have been figuring out how to force these models to do more and more work. And so the idea behind the Ralph tool is basically just force it to keep working, just keep going, whatever you're trying to do, however many steps you have, just keep running. And so it's just burning through tokens, more tokens, and just continuing to work even when you go to sleep. So this is one of those things where people are trying to figure out like, what's the scaling of like, can I do effort and just make sure I always get good results? And it seems like that's the case. One of the other ones that I've never used, it's more of an enterprise tool, but I hear about it a lot on podcasts, is this Blitzy one. And their whole thing is they want to be able to handle people's enterprise code. So it has millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of lines. They want to do a very good job of ingesting all of that code, indexing all of that code, and then being able to make changes to that code effectively, not breaking things throughout the pipeline. So it's much different when you're in an enterprise code base versus when you're doing that little script that I made at the beginning, demoing that. So this tool is all focused on like, how do we handle massive code bases, making sure we don't break things, making sure we keep as much in context as we can, and we can get the best result possible. So it was called Claude, then it was called Molt. Now it's called OpenClaw. So there's this tool that just came out that everyone's really excited about. And it's basically just trying to give it total control of everything. So it's this tool that basically you give it access to the computer, and then you just say you have full access. You can open the browser, you can go to YouTube, you can send text messages, you can connect to my Google Calendar. People have figured out like, okay, how do we get these models and then just give them like, coding agent is within its own sandbox. This is saying like, give it everything. What is it able to do? And it's mostly focused on being a personal assistant, but it has these connectors to all these different things so that it can function in that way. I listened to a podcast and they were just talking about how they were trying it out. A lot of people very concerned with the security elements of it, but you can see it's gotten massively popular over the span of just the past few days. So people are very excited about what this can do. The adventurous people are trying a lot of things with it. So I'll talk a little bit about the different types of ways that you can interact with it. So there's the prompt based. So what I showed was all prompt based. It's just basically saying like, I type something in, go do this thing, and then it goes and it does the thing. What some people do is there's different tools that are like PRD based, where it's like, here's the requirements of what I'm trying to build, and then it will try to satisfy all of these things. So you can do that sort of like test-driven development stuff where you say like, here's all the tests that you need to satisfy, and then the model will go and say, what pieces do I need to build in order to satisfy all of those things? And then I would also categorize it into like, there's sort of interactive and non-interactive. So the interactive, like with what I showed in Cursor, you get the text that's popping up right as you're starting to type. You're getting the stuff where like you run it and then it interacts a whole bunch. And then at the end, you can say, I can review this, or you can have something that like makes a PR for you. And then you say like, yes, no, at the end of it. And then there's other tools that are like truly non-interactive, where it's like, I don't even see the code. It's just like, make this website, it makes the website, deploys it. You don't even see any of the pieces of it. So on that last front, the like full automation, the non-interactive, there's all these different tools, and I'll just kind of poke at a couple of them. So this Replit company, their original focus was mostly on just like letting you run code in the browser and then host things and let other people interact with whatever you were doing. But they realized this is a good sandbox to run agents from. And so this is something where you can like build little AI apps or websites or whatever just using Replit. And it's very good at like, you just tell it to do whatever the thing is, and then it builds it, and you have all of the stuff to interact with right there. So like you can see, I asked Replit to clone LinkedIn, and then it just goes and it tries to build a copy of LinkedIn, basically. So there's a bunch of these. I won't go through all of them. So there's Lovable, Vercel V0, there's Wix, there's Squarespace. So anyone who's familiar with like Wix and Squarespace, these were originally sites where it was like, you can build a website, but you don't need to know any code. I'll drag and drop and type in some text, enter some image, something like that. And so these companies that have historically been like, pay $5 a month and then you get a website hosted, it's very simple, it doesn't do that much, have been adopting these AI coding tools, and then you can do significantly with it, instead of like, they used to build editors where it was just like drag and drop, whereas like, I want a text box here, and you're kind of just setting up like a PowerPoint slide more than anything. Now they're getting more and more powerful by introducing all of these different things that you might want to do with web design, injecting images that you generated and stuff like that. One of the ones that I'll point out is this tool called Manus. And Manus is partially a coding tool. They just got acquired by Meta. But a big piece of it is just being a general agent, kind of similar to that Open Claude, Molt, whatever it's called now. It's just a general tool. So it can go open a browser, it can maybe access your email, it can do all kinds of different things. You just have to give it access to the right things, and then it will go try to do these tasks for you. One time I was playing with it when it first came out, and you can even do something where it's like, make a healthy meal plan for me for the next 5 days, and then go to the Vaughn's website and put all of the things in the cart, basically. And it did this interesting thing where it says like, okay, open the link now, and you enter your login information and your credit card and whatever, because it had basically gone virtual browser, done all these clicks, gathered all the ingredients, done all that stuff, and then just basically said, I don't have your login, I don't have your credit card, and then like basically turned its screen to me and let me interact with it. I didn't do any of that, but it was interesting that it was able to actually go to the website and click through and add all this stuff. It was pretty powerful that it was able to do that. So there's Bolt and Base 44, and there's all these different companies. Like I can't cover all of them. There's too many floating around. So that's all of the like Gemini and curated content. One of the things that I wanted to show was I did some interaction with Gemini, and then I also did some interaction with ChatGPT, and I told ChatGPT I'm trying to make a presentation for this meetup, told it the idea, gave it the copy of the description, and then what it did, let me show. So I basically prompted it, and then it thought for 23 minutes and 8 seconds, and it built this whole presentation for me. So I'll show you what it created. It wasn't good enough that I actually used it today, obviously, but it's interesting that it went and it did all these web searches. It looked up all of these tools. It said, okay, how do I categorize these into different groups? So this like extended portion is just what ChatGPT created. So it made its own slides for me, basically. So I gave it the description of this talk, and then it basically grabbed all of the logos of this website, and it said, here's the different families of tools. And then it broke it into different groupings, so we can see IDEs, coding agents, SWE agents, builders, and platforms, and then it tried to categorize all of them, and it just laid out all of these slides on its own. It made this silly bar chart where it just said there's 4 in this category, 4 in that category, there's 8 categories somehow here, but there's only 4 on the left-hand side. So it's trying. It's pretty impressive that it can do this, but it's not fully there. So it made this slide just talking about the AI first IDEs, talked about some of the different coding agents, Cloud Code, Codex, all the different cloud native stuff, Code Rabbit. So that's one that can go and it reads your PRs and checks if everything's correct. All of these different prompt to app tools, talks about Wix, Squarespace, different platforms for the infrastructure. It did research on the Ralph tool. And then it even gave recommendations of like what should you use, how you should interact with it. And then it gave a little cheat sheet at the end saying basically like, here's what all these different things do. So that's all I have for today. I just wanted to show like I'm trying out all of these things in different ways just to see how they interact. So one thing about the Gemini slides that I created, those are just images. So I can't really edit those anymore. The ChatGPT one, you can see I can like highlight this stuff and edit it because it went and it truly made like proper slides. So it's pretty interesting that it went and it was able to create that. But it went and thought for 23 minutes, you can see all of the work that it went through just trying to research and understand the different things that are going on. Yeah, so that's all I have. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, the slides will be available.
I just had a quick comment, Ryan. I had to do that same thing that you just did a couple talks ago. It was really quick, and I needed to, create the slides really quickly. And I took a kind of two-step approach, like one, generating the content in sort of a more markdown form with notes on the images to generate, and then two, a generate me a Python program that, given this markdown, will create the slides for me,
Yeah.
rather than trying to do it all at once. Because yeah, I had similar results to you. It was kind of crap.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting trick. Anyone else?
Yeah, thanks for the talk, first of all. I would have a question around like the full agentic flow. Do you have a sense of the quality of it? Like, I'm a software engineer, so when I like do all of this stuff, I get outputs that are decent, but then like I need to review. Like the reviewing is almost a bottleneck. Like the question is more like how good are those end-to-end things really in practice? It's like in my experience, they're not that good. But like, do you have any sense of that?
I think they've gotten significantly better, but I also have had the same sense of like I've worked on multiple competitions and projects now where, or I would feel like at the end of this 3 month period, I've like solidified my code to the point where it's like this is good now. Like I can, if I want to make any changes, I've like arranged it in a good way. And what I felt using the assistance is basically like it builds its own crap on top of itself until I can no longer interact with it, basically. And so I've gotten to the point where like it gets I'm forced into using the agent because I no longer have like full understanding of what's happening. And I think in general, like they've gotten better to where the code is decent, but it makes choices where like architecturally it builds up and just kind of doesn't clean itself naturally.
Hey, Ryan, there's a question online. Could you talk a bit about specific ways to set up Cursor with markdown files and when that is needed, and any pointers on how to do that well? So I don't know if you have a lot of instructions in your markdown, or if you mostly just use the default model.
So I'm not a heavy like markdown user necessarily. So I don't know if I can even find the screen, but there's a way to basically set the different instructions, and you can say, do it in this style, act like you're the best programmer in the world, make sure you do it in the shortest way possible. There's all these different things. So the way that I typically do things, I can actually show one over here. I forgot to show this. I might need to log in again. Right. But one of the things that I do is very often for brainstorming, what I do is I'll do that like external memory thing where I basically say, write out a like brainstorm.md, and then it will list off, here's all the things that I told it to like think about and what we want to do in the future. And that's kind of my like issues list. But I don't really do that much in terms of like, I know some people have more complicated workflows where they're managing all these different rules that they apply to the model. I don't tend to do that so much.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know, maybe you could clarify in the chat or unmute. I don't know if they were kind of going for more like the agent sort of system level instructions, So like, I had a negative experience where I was like, okay, I really don't want Claude to go off and spend a lot of time thinking, use a lot of tokens, and build the wrong thing. So, one of their suggestions is if you're not really sure, then go ahead and ask them clarifying questions. So I tried putting that in my Claude Markdown file. And then it was like, if I asked it something really, really simple, like, hey, I have a for loop here and I just want to parallelize it. Like each one of them could be done completely independently, but I don't want to write the Python code for this. And then it would ask me like 3 clarifying questions. It's like, okay, this is taking this far too literally. It's not emphasizing the if this is complex and you're not sure you know what I want. It was just everything I did. So I like had to immediately delete that from my Claude Markdown file.
I'm showing something here. This is if I really want to like get into something complex, or if I have something where it's like I just want to log all of my ideas and then like prioritize them. This is something that I've frequently done, is I'll do like a to-do or like a brainstorm or something. And then what I'll do is I'll just basically in the chat window dump like, here's all of my ideas, here's all the stuff that I've already tried, here's the things that I'm considering. And then I'll ask it to like write this down and organize it, but also add its own ideas. And so often its ideas are not the best thing ever, but it's like branching points where it's like having a partner that it's like they said something, so it brings some idea back to me. So I found that very useful. One of the things that I meant to show but forgot about, one of the things that I've very frequently done is I ask it to like make its own markdown showing the flow of code or the flow of a model or the flow of data. And so it's very, very good at this kind of thing. So a couple weeks ago, I presented on the OCR model that I've been working on. And if you look at the pipeline, it's like very complicated. It's all of these pieces that are sewn together, basically. And I prompted it this morning to go through and just see like, can you understand the shapes of all of these things and how they fit together, and then go make it into a mermaid diagram. And so this is what this is showing, is basically it made this whole diagram showing like, okay, we have this image backbone, we expect it to get a certain resolution of input, it's going to this other merge, and then it's got a detection head on top of it. And then we've got all these different pieces that are going into the recognizer and the relational model. And so it does a very good job at this kind of thing, where if I was actually trying to do this, I probably could not form this diagram, or at the least, it would take me a very long time to go through and trace each piece and say, what's the size of this? What's the shape of this? How do these things fit into each other? It's just many lines of like, I have to go figure out what this config is pointing to and where this model is getting built and what's the size of this and how does this interact. So it's very, very strong at this kind of thing. I would say there's kind of 2 different modes. One is like just like helping you understand code, and the other is actually writing it for you. Yeah.
Could you talk about optimizing your subscription? Have you thought about things like maybe using Sonnet for the design work and then Opus for the actual coding, or vice versa? Is there a way to optimize your subscription by doing that?
There are some things out there that are like meta models that will try to automatically route to the appropriate model for a given task, where it's like, this is a simple 1-line change, so just go send it to Sonnet. This is a major refactor, so go send it to Opus. I tend to, when I was paying for it myself, I was just using Sonnet all the time, because that was like kind of the sweet spot in terms of like performance versus cost. And I was paying a decent amount. I went all the way to the max subscription. But for me, the $200 was worth it. It's like just one of the tools that I use in order to get the most done that I can. Now my work pays for it, so I don't worry about it.
Ryan, going back to the last question, I'll put this in the chat, but I haven't started using it. One of the things that I've seen people using is this open spec. And so basically it's a standard format for Markdown. So if you're further on the right of the chart that you had with automated development, then you're just basically writing a spec. And then you're telling the agents to, write all the test cases, figure out the plan, and then, run all the code and make sure it passes all the test cases. So instead of you having to come up with your own markdown for like, how am I going to organize this? You can use something like OpenSpec, and then you don't have to invent it yourself.
I just copied the slides into the Zoom again, and they're also in the Slack for anyone who's in the Slack. So if anyone wants to look at them. And in the notes, in the speaker notes, I also have the links to all of the different chats for making the slides too, if anyone wants to see
that. Question in the chat: are there any plugins that you use, or does the basic cursor just do everything?
I don't really use any plugins. There's extra add-ons in terms of like linters and code formatters and stuff like that. I use some of those, but I mostly just use the default stuff that they already have included.
Yeah, I would love suggestions if people have like different linters and things they use in their workflow. If we don't have time here, you can share on the STML Slack. I think that's always super helpful and pretty safe, right? You can play with a linter and then see if you're happy with it, and if you're not, you're not, and if it's good, then just keep using it. All right, awesome. Thanks, Ryan. A quick reminder, I haven't posted in Meetup yet, but next week, same time, same place, we're doing our monthly event, and so we'll have a few guest talks and ML news. So the talks, as I recall, oh shoot. So I need to finalize it. I apologize. That's why I haven't posted. But there was a suggestion to talk about DeepSeek OCR. There was another project that someone is working on that has to do with shipping and an LLM system that can figure out this very arcane system for like how you have to code what kind of contents are in this box when you're shipping internationally. And then time permitting, I was also potentially going to talk a little bit about the DeepSeek manifold hyperconnections, the MHC paper, which we can do a 5-minute version where without going to the gory details, but it's just talking about, hey, we've played with attention, we've played with the MLPs, with mixture of experts. Here's a very specific way that seems useful to play with the residual stream. So hope to see you all next week again. All right. Thanks, Ryan.